One at the Institute and behind your screens. I think the majority of you will be joining from behind the screens. I'm very sorry that I cannot be there at the Max Planck Institute today myself in person because I'm actually in parental leave and we have a 3-month-old baby here at home. So in case you will hear any bubbling, crying sounds, I hope this will not distract us, but please bear with me. The topic or the title of my short contribution today will be or is the global logistics of vaccination, how the COVID-19 pandemic amplified inequalities. And I want to discuss how, in fact, the measurements taken against the current pandemic have intensified global inequalities, from lockdowns and quarantines to prevent it spreading, from research and development of vaccines for immunization, up to emerging new digital forms of logistics for monitoring vaccination campaigns that are being rolled out on the ground. Clearly visible, the unequal distribution of vaccine campaigns around the globe is causing a disproportionately high death toll on the backs of the poor, of working class and migrant workers and people in general, and not the last, of women. State measurements taken against the pandemic were not only national and local, but made use of mathematical models in an unprecedented form in order to rationalize and secure their decisions. Politically Math, a math collective based in India, from whom we heard a contribution earlier, pointedly expressed their concern, quote, regarding the overwhelming importance of numbers in this discourse. They write that history has taught us that the value society places on a life lost to disease depends on the value society placed on that life when alive. They write, we are concerned about whom in this pandemic society has chosen to protect and who it has decided to lose in the process, end of quote. And in this direction, I want to refer the two examples for this input today. That of the patent divide and that of what I want to call biometric tracking infrastructures. Both these examples, I believe, address the question of protection addressed by Politically Math. Who is, in the eye of the states, to be lost in the process? Which decisions have let people be more or less or not at all protected? And I want to suggest to frame both of these examples that deal with the unequal production and distribution of vaccination campaigns by proposing a concept, and that is the concept of the infrastructural divide. This concept is by no means a well-tested and robust concept. It has recently emerged in the communications of our group, but I do believe it is a useful term to be tested out today during this workshop, and it is useful in addressing the important topic of inequality in the pandemic, seeking to address divides that are both global and structural at the same time. I will now present these two examples, which admittedly on first sight could be seen as merely illustrating a global divide, if you wish, the global north, the global south, a colonial divide. But I want to argue or also discuss with you how this notion of the infrastructural divide can be used as being both global and structural. And then there's, of course, other divides that are connected to it, such as the epistemic divides. So the first example is the patent divide. It is a notion that criticizes the refusal of Western pharma corporations to waive their vaccine patents, which is widely considered as the main hindrance to speed up global vaccine production. Patent waivers are a crucial aspect, many argue, to provide equal access to the knowledge about vaccine production globally. While the vaccine producers in the global north operate on a high price, low volume model of vaccine production, in the global south it's the other way around, and a low price, high volume model is dominant. For instance, the Indian Serum Institute has become the world's largest vaccine manufacturer by volume. This shows the ability of manufacturers based in the global south to manufacture the high amounts that are actually needed to immunize the global population against the virus. On the other hand, the notion of patent divide is critical of the so-called vaccine nationalism of the richer countries, here especially the US, the European Union, and the UK. that have used their market power to buy up in advance the vaccine stocks and reserve nearly all production volumes for their own population, leaving middle and low income states far behind, which is of course the second important reason why the access is so unequally distributed. This slide, you probably have seen it, it was circulating across the internet quite a lot, clearly shows these power dynamics of the patent divide. Who is in favor of patent waivers? This divide, which hinders global production, ultimately allows new infections to rage, as we are witnessing now with the Lambda variant. New variants to arise, and at the end of the day, more people are dying than need to be. This is also what Krishna Udayakumar from Duke Global Health Innovation Center says. By buying up the vaccines in advance, the countries supported also their national research and development infrastructures and pharma industries, and made sure that these vaccines are the dominant ones in the vaccine market. This itself is part of a larger, more general problem of the social production of medical science. The vaccines are created on the shoulders of global scientific public research from multiple different countries, funded by taxpayers' money, and on the other hand, the privatized and, of course, financialized appropriation of its profits. According to the People's Vaccine Alliance, a coalition of development and medical charities and NGOs, Pfizer, AstraZeneca, and Johnson & Johnson had, as of May 21, paid out $26 billion in dividends to shareholders. This problem of the relation between finance and science, research and development, and production should become much more integral to the current discussion on the effects and the power plays at stake that we witness here in the pandemic. The fact that the states are, to sum it up, the fact that the states are hoarding vaccines and protect the profits of their pharmaceutical corporations instead of saving lives, as the People's Vaccine Alliance write, has caused criticisms from around the world. Although this has put some pressure on the pharma companies to waive their patents and share their know-how to transfer their technology and knowledge to manufacturers, it has not resulted in any meaningful action. It has not resulted in patent waivers. It has rather urged them to defend and legitimize their stance on intellectual property. They argue that without IP, there wouldn't be any incentive for them to produce the vaccine volumes needed to immunize the world. While unsurprisingly, they downplay the role the public sector, the taxpayers' money, has played in the social production of the vaccines, they make the following interesting claim. The German syndicate of pharma industry has argued in a very paternalizing colonial way. They wrote that vaccine production cannot be set up overnight on a greenfield site, that there are no production capacities. There are no vaccine factories that are able to produce the vaccines. This is the claim from the German syndicate of the pharma industry. And this seems to be not the case. In fact, Nick Dearden from the NGO Global Justice Now was saying in March this year already that there are production factories, including in Europe and in general in countries who try to develop vaccines but weren't successful and would be open to produce the ones that actually were successful. Importantly, additionally, there are several reports that found that that support this, and these reports found, for instance, by Associated Press, that in March this year already they wrote that, quote, in an industrial neighborhood on the outskirts of Bangladesh's largest city lies a factory with gleaming new equipment imported from Germany. Its immaculate hallways lined with hermetically sealed rooms. It is operating at just a quarter of its capacity. It is one of 3 factories the Associated Press found on 3 continents whose owners say they could start producing hundreds of millions of COVID-19 vaccines on short notice if only they had the blueprints and technical know-how. This is crucial as it undermines one of the main arguments of the pharma industry, right? The claim of lacking manufacturing capacities should suggest that it's beyond their sphere of influence. So why even waive the patents in the first place? It should be discussed much more widely, especially with regard to the German involvement, as mentioned here. It's not much time to go into this in detail, but it's important here also to mention briefly COVAX. COVAX is the abbreviation for the COVID-19 Global Vaccine Access, and it's an initiative coordinated by the Immunization Alliance, Gavi, the World Health Organization, and the Research Alliance, CEPI, Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness. COVAX kind of acts like a middleman between countries and vaccine manufacturers. The objective of this initiative is to provide a fair and equal access to vaccines for middle and low-income countries that were shut out to make their own deals, because the rich nations made, as mentioned earlier already, their bilateral deals directly with the pharma corporations. It sounds good, but again, it basically depends on the rich countries' goodwill and decisions of how much of their pre-purchased dosages they donate to poorer countries. If you wish a vaccine multilateralism next to vaccine nationalism, but no real structural change towards more equality in who is able to produce vaccine research and development, the ownership of intellectual properties, and not least, the means of vaccine production itself. Although COVAX has started to deliver dosages, which is great, of course, it saved life, it is by far not enough to meaningfully stop the spreading of the virus and protect people in African countries, and for instance in African countries, and as the new Lambda variant is spreading in South American countries. What's worse, COVAX now serves as a tool for whitewashing on the side of states and pharma industries alike, instead of actually structurally transforming the vaccine market. They can claim now to help poorer countries through donating vaccines, and this mode of charity and donation is of course very familiar to them. And I want to argue how the notion of social production of vaccines is also useful to make visible how parts of said social production take place outside the global north and extend to the global south with regard to the last step in the process of vaccination. And after we have looked now at the infrastructural divide and at the epistemic divide in the research and development and the production of vaccines, I want to look now at how the organization of monitoring and the administration of the drugs is actually organized. And here the notion of logistics introduces the second example of biometric tracking infrastructures. It is intended to answer the question of what track and trace tools for coordinating the vaccination campaign are emerging, not yet fully installed, but are emerging to be used on the ground. Biometric programs use irises, hands or faces in order to monitor the ongoing efforts to vaccinate populations in the global south. That's the idea. By biometrically tracking and tracing every individual, it promises to facilitate the logistics on the ground and speed up global immunization. With the rationale that many regions in the global south lack robust identification registries, the vaccine campaigns rolled out go hand in hand with creating formal proofs of identity through biometrics. Initiatives pushing for these technologies are not isolated events, but really represent a more general and global shift by humanitarian, state and corporate actors towards digital and biometric ideas since a while now, and I don't have time for that now, but I can talk about that more maybe at a later time. And importantly, I want to say that the need for fast and coordinated vaccination campaigns during the COVID-19 emergency further emboldens and legitimizes their claims. And of course, we know that the number of refugees and internally displaced people worldwide is steadily rising, so that migration movements become a key site of biometric tracking infrastructures, which puts people with a low ability to protect themselves at very high risks, because we don't know how and for what purposes these biometric essentially centralized data banks will be used in the future. Governments could use them to set up mass surveillance systems. Corporations are already using biometric registries, biometric data banks to monitor and tag its customers. So we have here, or a recent case is that of the Taliban, who took over power in Afghanistan, and they've been using the biometric systems set up by the US military to identify people affiliated with Western actors. So these structural unequal conditions that inform the construction of these biometric tracking infrastructures are part of what I want to frame as infrastructural divide. This discussion is important, especially with regard to the current discussions of COVID-19 becoming endemic like the flu. Will the new track and trace tools become the new normal, so to speak, endemic to society as well? This perhaps less known part of vaccination logistic rolled out or intended to roll out predominantly in the global south by Western actors should be discussed more widely, I think. Um, and and now I'm already way over. I hope you forgive me. Um, maybe just to wrap it up very briefly, I think it is important to keep in mind these aspects of logistical and material supply chains behind the global vaccination campaigns and the vaccine research and development in order to show how they're deeply ingrained in asymmetric relations of power in the present time. So with the two examples, I intended to briefly sketch out how the global and infrastructural conditions of vaccine R&D, its production, and its administration on the ground made evident differences between the global north and the south, but as well between the social production of medical science and its appropriation by corporations. And that these differences, in fact, is what amplifies these pre-existing inequalities. And on the ground of these two examples, I want to use, or that I used patent divide and biometric infrastructures, I would like to just contribute to further research and inquiry by, as I said, suggesting this concept of the infrastructural divide in order to discuss this problematic relation. I think I stop now. I'm sorry, I'm more than 3 minutes over. I hope you forgive me, and I hope I can be attending the discussion afterwards if our baby lets me do that. And thank you for listening.